Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar, The 6 Security Pillars of GDPR Compliance. I am your host, Mindy Stubbs, Demand Generation Coordinator here at Optive. Before we get started, a few items of housekeeping. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the next few days for on-demand viewing. You can see here on the console that we have several resources you can use during or following the webinar. This includes some resources we think you'll find valuable when it comes to your security program. There's a Q&A box also located on the right. On the left, you can see our speaker bios. You'll be able to see all these same widgets on your toolbar as you scroll to the bottom of your screen. Regarding the Q&A chat box, we will be having someone monitoring the chat box throughout the webinar and during the Q&A period. However, we may not get to every question. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up after the webinar. Now, let me take a moment to introduce our speakers. Peter H. Gregory is an Executive Director with Optive and the CISO Services Executive Consulting Organization, where he helps organizations develop security and privacy program roadmaps. Before Optive, Peter built and ran security programs at various public companies, including Concur Technologies. He has written over 40 books on information security, including CISA All-in-One Study Guide, CISM All-in-One Study Guide, and CISSP Guide to Security Essentials. Sean Ryan is a Senior Product Marketing Manager within the Data Security team at Imperva. Imperva is a cybersecurity company with leading data and application security solutions protecting business-critical information in hybrid environments. In developing and executing marketing strategies and content that support the company's data and security portfolio and enabling various stakeholders and partners, Sean keeps a close eye on global privacy and regulatory changes, and also ever-evolving customer needs. Now, let's get things started. I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you, Mindy. In our talk today, we'll start with a brief overview of GDPR. Next, we'll discuss the partnership most organizations need that consist of legal, IT, and cybersecurity. Then I'll be discussing the 6 cybersecurity pillars. Next, Sean Ryan will discuss Imperva Data Protection Solutions. Finally, we will discuss ways in which your organization can begin taking steps to improve your GDPR compliance. I'll take just a few moments first to summarize the GDPR. Approved in 2016 and effective in May 2018, GDPR requires organizations that store or process information on European data subjects to comply with several provisions that extend the legal rights of those data subjects. Mainly, organizations are required to be transparent with regards to their handling of EU subject data, providing means for EU data subjects to view, ask for correction, and ask for removal of their data. GDPR also requires that organizations take measures to protect EU subject data from unauthorized access and disclosure, implemented principally through IT security controls. Rather steep fines, which could be as high as 20 million euros or 4% of annual global turnover, has gotten the attention of business, IT, and cybersecurity executives. This provides plenty of incentives for organizations to organize their privacy and security programs in order to comply with GDPR and hopefully avoid a costly data breach. Many organizations, including those located outside of the EU, are in scope for GDPR. Essentially, GDPR applies to the processing of personal information of EU residents, regardless of the location of the data or the processing. In other words, GDPR applies to all service providers who work with this data, whether they interact directly with those data subjects. Basically, any organization and its universe of service providers that processes personal information for EU residents is in scope for GDPR and required to comply with GDPR. GDPR brings together legal, IT, and cybersecurity functions in an organization. I'll describe each in a little more detail. Legal support is required in several ways, including organizations need to establish their legal basis for processing personal information. This is described in Article 6 of the GDPR. Organizations need to establish their roles as controller, joint controller, and processor for each activity involving PII. This is discussed in Chapter 4, Articles 24 through 30. Organizations need to validate that their notice of privacy practices accurately describes activities in the organization and is compliant with GDPR. IT support is required mainly through the design and implementation of information systems that conform to access controls and policies. Finally, cybersecurity support is required through policy development, risk management, and confirming that all required security controls are in place and working effectively. These are the 6 security pillars of GDPR. I'll go into detail on each of these on subsequent slides. The first pillar is data governance. This means that management must be aware of and be in control of all aspects of data and data processing in the organization. In my experience, many organizations have not formally established this function. Instead of upper management having visibility into the processing of data, it is delegated too low in the organization's rank and file, resulting in executives having neither visibility nor control of this processing. The second pillar is data discovery. Do you know where your data is? Sure, in your structured data stores, but what about in your unstructured data stores? File servers, SharePoints, cloud storage providers, company-owned workstations, personally owned workstations, mobile devices, third-party service providers, and so on. The design and implementation of information technology today favors the uncontrolled proliferation of sensitive data throughout and beyond the organization, well out of its control. The first step is to determine where in-scope PII data actually resides. Once this is known, organizations can take further steps to gain more visibility and control over its processing and transmission of sensitive data. The third pillar is data classification. After discovering what data you have in the second pillar, stratify it according to sensitivity and protection schemes. Develop classification tiers that define the fundamental nature of data. For example, an organization might have 3 tiers of classification: public, sensitive, and restricted. PII might be placed into restricted, for instance, or there might be a separate PII classification if protection and handling measures must vary from other classifications. Each organization needs to figure this out for themselves. For each classification level of data in the data classification scheme, determine how data should be handled in each of several use cases. These might include what protection measures should be used when data is emailed to another party, stored on a file server, stored in a cloud-based storage service, written to removable storage, or stored on a workstation. DLP solutions can be used here. However, organizations need to first determine these use cases and then consider automation to observe data usage and perhaps even enforce data usage. The fourth pillar is data access. In Articles 24, 30, and 32, GDPR requires that organizations protect personal data and record processing activities. Access controls are often the only line of defense between sensitive information and people. It is therefore critical that personal data be protected with a variety of access controls that make it reasonably convenient for authorized persons to access it, while effectively preventing all other persons from being able to access it. This has been the challenge of information security since its beginning in the 1970s and even earlier. The fifth pillar is data handling. This is where privacy goes beyond information security and includes all of the ways that the organization uses personal data. I divide these activities into two groups. The first being the ways in which the organization consciously uses personal data, and the second being the ways in which individuals and groups use the data that goes beyond what the organization itself intends to do. Part or all of these activities may or may not be in violation of an organization's Notice of Privacy Practices or internal privacy policies. This, in turn, could result in the organization getting itself into trouble with data protection authorities. The sixth and final pillar is data protection. This is all about information security and all of the activities found in a modern information security program. Activities in a security program include, but are not limited to, security policy, risk management, encryption, data loss prevention, security event monitoring, security incident response, secure systems development, third-party risk management, cloud security, vulnerability management, identity and access management, and security awareness training. The planning with IT, legal, and cybersecurity that I discussed earlier, as well as the 6 pillars of security for GDPR, do not represent once-and-done efforts. Instead, these represent a corporate lifestyle change that every organization may need to make. This lifestyle change affects the legal team through work including interpreting different articles in GDPR and additional contract language in business agreements. It affects IT through new or expanded data governance and data management practices, as well as improved access management practices. And it affects cybersecurity through every aspect of cybersecurity that must be done better than before. The lifestyle change affects executives and their involvement in IT, security, and privacy steering teams. It affects corporate boards through the need for greater cyber risk oversight. Finally, the lifestyle change affects the entire organizational culture through greater awareness of security and privacy policies and procedures, affecting how many workers do their jobs. This lifestyle change takes some effort but results in an organization with greater compliance and improved business resilience. Now over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Peter. So as Peter covered in the overview of the 6 pillars of GDPR, the regulation is expansive and covers a variety of subject areas, acts, provisions, and actions. While the various requirements across the 6 pillars are spread across the articles, the specific data rules and requirements are primarily contained within 4 articles, namely 32 to 35 of the GDPR. So let's dig a little deeper and see what these articles actually mean and what the resulting requirements might be for a data security response. First, Article 25 is worth referencing as it focuses on data protection by design and default and refers to the processing of personal data requiring that appropriate technical and organizational measures be taken in order to secure and achieve the requirements of this regulation. So there's no specific mention of technologies, given that these will obviously evolve and change over time, but that appropriate measures are taken to achieve the regulation requirements. We'll talk about this more as we move forward. Other key articles include Article 32, which talks about protecting personal data against accidental or unlawful loss or breach, which then leads to the suggestion of ongoing data security efforts and the use of pseudonymization technologies to achieve de-identification and further security. And again, we'll talk about that more as we move further into the presentation. Also key is Article 33 and 34 and a link to the required 72-hour data breach notification. This is and will continue to be a significant challenge for organizations to manage, and having appropriate strategies and technologies in place to address this requirement will be key. So the takeaway here is that organizations must understand the articles around data security and ensure that they have effective and comprehensive response plans that address each one, and the plan that includes expert support and technology coverage where required. So let's summarize and simplify things here. Here are some of the key considerations and supporting technologies organizations should be looking for in terms of starting their GDPR compliance efforts or continuing them, particularly around Articles 32 to 35. Let's walk through each of these and provide some additional clarity and context, really building on the 6-pillar coverage piece that Peter spoke of earlier. So understanding the organization's data landscape and classifying the data is obviously critical to initiating GDPR compliance efforts, and this requirement cannot be understated as being one of the first and most critical steps. Organizations must look for purpose-built technologies, in my opinion, and or managed services to support this effort. As we've seen, manual or homegrown solutions simply won't be as effective or sustainable over the long term as the organization's data set continues to grow, and we see that across the industry. Key capabilities to consider at this point include understanding where your databases and copies are, copies being key, significant volume of copies out there, discovering and classifying all sensitive data within those databases, establishing an inventory of the results and providing reporting clarity to the organization on what and where sensitive data resides, which better enables informed decisions on what remedial actions to take. So really understanding what you have, where it is, before you run off and start investing in technologies and solutions to try to achieve compliance. So following the discovery and classification process, decisions need to be made around securing and reducing the data and data risk footprint. Supporting efforts to minimize data and drive increased security of processing includes the implementation of solutions and processes to de-identify personal data and therefore limit the spread of it, and also the risk associated with a data breach. The GDPR outlines pseudonymization as one process that can support the achievement of this. It defines pseudonymization as the processing of personal data in such a way that the data can no longer be attributed to a specific subject without the use of additional information. In simple terms, pseudonymized data has been de-identified such that the data cannot directly identify the subject. Organizations that employ this tool will benefit from a relaxation of certain provisions of GDPR, in particular with respect to data breach notification requirements, because loss of pseudonymized data is unlikely to create any risk of harm, and possible exemption from the need to comply to data subject access, correction, erasure, and data portability requests. Put simply, organizations will have a very strong incentive to employ data pseudonymization technologies under GDPR to mitigate their compliance obligations and manage their risks. Data masking technologies support the delivery of pseudonymized data and offer an ease of implementation and efficiencies in delivering de-identified data for ongoing use in DevOps, which is a significant variable given that less protected DevOps environments are common relative to production scenario. In such cases, the anonymous information should be used rather than live data, and pseudonymized data delivers that. The second reason that masking reduces the risk impact from a data breach is obvious in that de-identifying the data, limiting the risk, really allows your developers and end users to operate without fear of accidentally or unintentionally exposing that data. Key capabilities to look for in solutions to support this include consistent masking capabilities that maintain data relationships, multiple transformation techniques in terms of masking or pseudonymizing that data and giving you flexibility in your DevOps environments, broad platform support, and database support as well. So let's look at security of processing. Under the provisions, organizations are required to implement appropriate technical and organizational security controls to protect personal data against accidental or unlawful loss, destruction, alteration, access, or disclosure. Here you're looking for database activity monitoring solutions that can, among other things, identify holes that hackers can exploit, help prioritize vulnerabilities, provide ongoing real-time monitoring, and capabilities to stop suspicious activity and report on it. As mentioned earlier, breach detection and notification is a key component of GDPR and within Articles 32 and 33. Organizations with effective monitoring and detection solutions in place will certainly benefit from the ability to minimize the likelihood, severity, and investigative requirements related to an incident or breach. Necessary capabilities for both before and after a breach include continuous risk assessment, adequate security control, application, detection controls, and timely response procedures. The key questions you'll need to be able to answer here include what data is impacted, who is the data about, is the breach of harm potential impact to the individual, how did the breach happen, and who do we notify and how. Being prepared for GDPR and having purpose-built monitoring and reporting technologies in place will certainly ease the burden of this requirement. Transfer of data for various use cases and cross-border transfers are permitted under GDPR, which is obviously good considering where the industry is going and the amount and volume of data that is being transferred on a daily basis. But there are requirements, including that transfers only occur to entities in compliance with GDPR regulations. Ensuring your data transfers and receiving parties are in compliance will be a critical activity for you to initiate, not just for GDPR compliance, but as it relates to overall data security and integrity. Previously, we discussed de-identifying data for DevOps, which would also support this process, as would auditing technologies that can record all user activities, provide visibility into transactions, and create an audit trail that can assist in analyzing all transfers, any data theft, and sensitive data exposure. Key capabilities you're looking for here include data monitoring and access tracking, blocking capabilities to mitigate risks, and ongoing and automated reporting capabilities to support organizational review and compliance reporting efforts. Previously, one of the more critical requirements in the new GDPR world relates to the requirements around data breach notification, and it's worth digging a little deeper into this one. Under GDPR, organizations only have 72 hours to gather all related information and report data breaches to the relevant regulator. Clearly, the information expectations are high, and the timeline is quite short, thereby posing a significant challenge to the organization as it scrambles to meet the requirements. This is a pretty heavy undertaking for any organization and involves the development and provisioning of a comprehensive containment plan. As discussed previously, having processes and technologies in place that continuously monitor, detect, and report on data access and activities will greatly ease this burden. Attempting to monitor or identify a breach and achieve compliance with this requirement without this type of support and purpose-built tools will really provide a recipe for failure. So, at the end of the day, preparing for GDPR and the ongoing compliance efforts is not all bad. It sounds like a lot of work, sounds like a lot of analysis, and it is. But there's certainly benefits to undertaking this exercise, obviously with the support of the internal organization, external experts were required and technologies were required. But there are some very real and tangible benefits for those proactive organizations that are either fully compliant with GDPR, on the path to catching up and getting there, and or maintaining it long term. So let's look at a couple of these advantages. A competitive advantage being obviously the biggest and first that we'll look at in terms of those organizations that have built plans, executed, maintained, reduced their risk, really are driving an advantage from a competitive marketplace when you look at the fact that most studies show that organizations haven't achieved or fully achieved and or struggle to maintain compliance with these regulations and or their growing data sets. So there's an advantage to doing this and an advantage to doing it well and doing it right. Process improvement would be key. Again, if you follow the process flow and the things that Peter spoke of today, and engaging your teams and building cross-functional plans, the opportunity to expand that logic, that thinking, and that process improvement within the organization outside of data security is a real opportunity for the organization as well. Similarly, cross-functional collaboration, again, bringing teams together to work on this particular project is one thing, but enabling that and building off the collaboration that occurs as you build through GDPR compliance can really add value when you're looking at other projects and initiatives to the organization and can really breed success outside of compliance efforts. And again, another big one is data breach mitigation. This is all about compliance, but the opportunity to reduce your risk and reduce the risk of the cost of data breach and the embarrassment of a data breach is significant and a key outcome of this effort and this process. And then it's just overall business growth potential and exploring your data set, understanding what you have for that discovery and classification process, discussing within the organization what you need to have, what you need to track, what needs to be stored, what needs to be used, how it needs to be used. is undoubtedly going to uncover opportunities around your customer data and how your DevOps teams might be able to leverage that more efficiently and effectively to drive the business forward and uncover new opportunities from a development perspective that might not have been seen prior to this exercise. So there really are some key benefits and for actively and proactively taking the right steps to achieve and or maintain long-term your GDPR compliance. So with that, and that look at from the data security side, I'm going to pass things back over to Peter to wrap up and close.
Thanks, Sean. That was really insightful. Optive assists organizations with their data management programs, including the 6 pillars we have discussed. Optive helps organizations start with business-aligned, risk-driven, and compliance-driven approaches, including a wide range of advisory offerings, service offerings, and product implementation and support to help organizations plan, build, and run their information security and data privacy programs. So how can Optive help? Optive has a broad suite of information security and privacy-related service offerings available to customers in all industry sectors. There are too many to list here. They are in major categories including identity and access management, application security, risk and compliance, security and privacy strategy, data protection, security operations, foundational security, and cloud security. We have advisory offerings from high-level strategy to tooling implementation, health check, and tune-up. Your key takeaways from our talk should include these. First, identify your business stakeholders in legal, IT, and cybersecurity. Identify their roles and ensure they carry out activities to help your organization understand exactly what you need to do to be compliant with the GDPR. Along this journey, ensure that your data governance, data discovery, data classification, data access, data handling, and data protection capabilities ensure your ongoing compliance with GDPR, as well as better peace of mind knowing that you have risk-based, business-aligned capabilities to ensure you protect your customer data and keep your organization out of trouble. Finally, understanding the various data security articles and what gaps you currently have with respect to internal strategies, expertise, and technology coverage will be key to effectively managing your ongoing compliance efforts while at the same time not losing focus on your core business function. Okay, Mindy, it is now back to you.
Thanks, Sean and Peter. That was really awesome. So we are now going to answer some of the questions. A few have already been submitted. A quick reminder that you can post your questions into the Q&A chat box. So Peter, I think the first question is actually for you. Does GDPR require that PII be encrypted?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that is a great question, and we do hear this a lot from our clients. GDPR does not specifically require encryption. However, based on risk assessments, threat assessments, and so on, encryption may be warranted. What really matters is whether your decision to encrypt or not to encrypt is defensible.
Awesome. Okay. Next question. Can we get certified to GDPR?
GDPR provides for the existence of certification organizations, but I am not aware of any accredited certified certification organizations at this time. But in the future, whether an organization chooses to pursue GDPR certification or not is going to depend on a lot of factors, including case law and competitive and market forces.
Great. All right. Let's see. So we haven't started GDPR compliance efforts. How can we know if we need to?
Well, what we often recommend, since GDPR is a law, that you find a qualified legal counsel who has expertise in technology and privacy, and specifically in GDPR, if you can find that, and get a qualified legal opinion from that legal counsel.
Awesome. Looks like this might be the last question unless anyone submits anything else, but this one says, my company is multinational but has no customer data, but only employee data. Do I have to comply with GDPR for handling our internal HR data?
What we have found from the legal counsel that we've been talking to is that, yes, HR data is in scope for GDPR, and it especially matters if you have one single HRIS system that, say, is located in the United States, or just almost anywhere where you have that cross-border data flow. One avenue that companies often take is to utilize binding corporate rules for this purpose.
Awesome. All right. Well, it looks like those were all the questions that were submitted. So that concludes today's webinar. I want to thank you all for participating, especially our awesome speakers. We hope you found this presentation informative. A follow-up email with the slides will be sent out shortly, which will include links to review today's webinar, recording, and additional resources. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.